The night he crashed his car, I thought I was rushing to save him. But the truth waiting in that hospital destroyed everything I believed about love. My name's Elara, and for most of my life, I believed love could survive anything. I was wrong, but learning that truth changed everything. I used to think hospitals smelled like safety, that soft blend of antiseptic, coffee, and something faintly sweet. Now, whenever I catch that scent, it feels like betrayal. The night everything changed, I was standing by the stove, stirring soup that had gone cold twice. My husband Adrian was late again. I told myself he was probably caught up at work. He was a cardiac surgeon, the kind of man who wore responsibility like armor. But when the phone rang, it wasn't his voice. It was the hospital. "Mrs. Keene? There's been an accident. Dr. Keene is stable, but you should come." Those words, stable, but you should come, they hang in your mind like fog. I dropped the spoon, grabbed my coat, and drove through rain that looked like it couldn't decide if it wanted to fall or freeze. When I reached the hospital, I moved on instinct. I'd been there hundreds of times before, delivering food to Adrian on his night shifts, smiling politely at the nurses who all seemed to adore him. But that night, I walked past their eyes like a ghost. A nurse named Lila, one I knew well, caught my arm gently. "He's in room 312, Elara. He's okay. Just a few bruises." The paramedics said he swerved to avoid a dog. I nodded, thanked her, and went in. He was lying there with a small cut near his temple, chest rising evenly, monitors beeping in steady rhythm. Relief washed over me, until I saw the woman sitting by his bedside. She wasn't a nurse. She wasn't family. And she was holding his hand. Her name tag caught the light. Dr. C. Reynolds. I recognized the name immediately, the new trauma resident he'd been mentoring. The one everyone said was brilliant. I froze at the doorway, and she looked up, startled, guilty. Adrian stirred and turned his head toward me. "Elara," he said softly, his voice rough from the accident. "You're here." "Of course I am," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "I'm your wife." Dr. Reynolds released his hand like it burned her. I'll give you two a moment," she said, standing too quickly and nearly tripping over the IV line. She slipped past me without making eye contact. I stood there for a long time before I moved closer. He smiled, a weak, forced smile. "It's not what you think," he whispered. I didn't ask what I was supposed to think, because I already knew. In the days that followed, he stayed in the hospital for observation. I stayed too, bringing coffee, checking his vitals when nurses were busy, playing the role of devoted wife. But behind every act of care, my mind replayed that image, her hand over his. It wasn't the touch that hurt. It was how natural it had looked. On the third day, I overheard them in the hallway. I hadn't meant to. I'd gone to the vending machine for water, and when I returned, their voices drifted around the corner, low, urgent. "Adrian," she whispered. "You promised you'd talk to her after your conference last month. You said you were ending it." "I will," he said quickly. "You don't understand, Claire. She's been through a lot lately. Her mother's illness, the foundation, all of it. I can't just drop this bomb on her while she's fragile." Fragile. The word slid under my skin like a needle. I didn't hear the rest. Or maybe I didn't want to. My hands shook so hard the water bottle slipped and hit the floor, echoing down the hall. Their voices stopped. "Elara?" Adrian called. I stepped into view, calm, collected, the same way I had been when my mother died, numb on the outside, burning underneath. "Sorry," I said quietly. "Didn't mean to interrupt." I turned and walked away before either of them could answer. That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot for hours. The rain had stopped, but the windshield was still streaked with water and streetlight. My reflection looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, almost translucent. For years, I'd built my world around him. Every late dinner, every missed anniversary, all forgiven under the belief that he was saving lives. And maybe he was, but not mine. I thought of every patient he'd held hope for, every family he'd comforted, and how easily he'd lied to me, By morning, I knew what I had to do. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I smiled, brought him breakfast, kissed his forehead like everything was fine. Because now I was done being fragile. I was going to let the truth expose itself, one quiet move at a time. When he was discharged, I helped him pack his things from the hospital. Claire avoided me completely, which made it easier to observe her. She walked with the kind of guilt that doesn't fade. 2 weeks later, Adrian was back at work, acting like nothing had happened. I started volunteering at the same hospital, not because I wanted to be close, but because distance had never protected me. Watching did, I began noticing details, subtle touches between them in the hallway, conversations that stopped when others walked in. I never said a word, but I started documenting everything. Quietly, emails printed and filed under meaningless names, texts backed up to a hidden folder. Even a few photos, not scandalous but damning enough in context. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was preservation, evidence of the moment I decided I'd never let anyone rewrite my story again. Then came the night of the fundraiser. The hospital was hosting its annual gala, a black tie event where donors and doctors pretended to be a family. Adrian was speaking. Claire was coordinating volunteers. I was invited as his wife, of course, the smiling ornament that made him look stable and complete. I wore a navy dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. He complimented me in front of everyone. My wife, Elara, has always supported me. The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. Later, I excused myself to the restroom. But instead of turning left, I slipped down the hall toward the storage wing, where Claire had been setting up donation boxes. She was alone, sorting papers, humming softly. When she looked up and saw me, she froze. "Elara," she said carefully, "you look beautiful tonight." "Thank you," I replied, stepping closer. "You and Adrian make a good team." Her throat tightened. "It's not what—" I raised a hand. "Please." I've heard that line before. Silence stretched between us. Then I said something I hadn't planned. "You know what hurts most? It's not that you love him. It's that you thought I wouldn't notice." She looked at me with tears pooling in her eyes. "He said he'd tell you." "I know," I said. "He also said I was fragile." Her face crumpled. I didn't yell. I didn't slap her. I just left, because in that moment I realized she wasn't my enemy. He was. That was the night I stopped being quiet, but not loud either. I played the long game. Within a month, I filed for a quiet separation. No screaming, no drama. Just papers, precision, and patience. When Adrian received the notice, he called me from his office. "Elara, what is this?" "You're overreacting." "No," I said softly. "I'm just finally reacting." He tried to charm me, to explain, to twist the narrative. But truth has a strange way of untangling itself when you stop defending lies. The hospital board found out weeks later, not because I told them, but because I'd anonymously submitted evidence of his unprofessional relationship with a subordinate. They launched an inquiry. Claire resigned quietly. Adrian took a leave of absence, citing personal stress. When it was all over, I went back to the hospital one last time. Not for him, but for closure. Lila found me in the corridor, smiling sadly. "You're stronger than I thought, Elara." "No," I said. "Just finally awake." Outside, the air was sharp and clean. I stood by the ambulance bay, watching the city lights blur into the distance, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel fragile. I just felt free. A month after the inquiry began, the hospital felt different, quieter, almost embarrassed. I still volunteered 3 days a week, sorting patient files and helping in reception. Every corridor used to echo with his name. Now it didn't. People whispered instead, half gossip, half sympathy, but I kept my head down. When Adrian finally came back, he looked thinner. The swagger was gone. He walked with that stiff politeness people wear when they know everyone's talking about them. He spotted me near the elevators one afternoon. "Elara," he said like we were old friends. "Dr. Keene," I replied, the title slicing between us like glass. He sighed. You don't have to do this. You've made your point, I tilted my head. Have I? Because I'm not sure what my point even was. Maybe it was honesty. Maybe it was self-respect. Claire's gone, he said quietly. She moved back to Boston. I know. His eyes searched my face for softness. There wasn't any left. I made a mistake. I smiled, small and calm. You made a choice, he flinched. Then the elevator doors opened and I stepped inside without another word. For weeks I expected to feel triumphant. I didn't. Revenge is supposed to taste sharp and sweet. Mine felt like cold water, clean, but impossible to hold. I started running in the mornings before sunrise, circling the empty park near our old house. I sold the house soon after. Too many ghosts in the walls. The divorce hearing was brief. He didn't contest. The judge asked the usual questions, signed the papers, and that was that. Afterward, I walked out into the courtyard where the city hummed with traffic. A breeze lifted my hair. For the first time, my name, Elara Keene, belonged entirely to me. 3 months later, the hospital called again. Different voice. Different reason. They were short-staffed in the pediatric wing and asked if I could coordinate volunteers for an upcoming health drive. I almost said no. Then I realized how symbolic it felt. To return, not as someone's wife, but as myself. When I arrived that morning, the halls smelled of disinfectant and crayons. Children's laughter echoed through the corridors. It didn't feel haunted anymore. Halfway through the day, I noticed a familiar voice behind me. Adrian. He'd been reinstated, temporarily, they said, under review. He approached hesitantly. Elara, could we talk? I turned, clipboard in hand. About what? The weather? He gave a tired smile. About everything. I know I can't undo it, I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For not destroying me completely. You could have gone public. You didn't, I met his eyes. You did that to yourself. He nodded, eyes lowering. Fair. Then he said something I didn't expect. They offered me a position overseas, research program in Zurich. I'm leaving next month. Good, I said softly. New places have shorter shadows. He studied me for a moment, as if memorizing the distance between who I was and who I'd become. You're different, he murmured. No, I replied. I'm just finally visible. That night I went home and sat by the window with tea. Outside, rain streaked down the glass exactly like the night of the accident, but the feeling was different. I didn't flinch at thunder anymore. I pulled out the small leather notebook I'd been keeping. Dates, moments, fragments of thought. I read the first entry. He called me fragile. Then the last. I'm still standing. I closed it gently and tucked it into a drawer. A few weeks later came the hospital's annual awards banquet, the same gala where everything had cracked open the first time. Lila convinced me to attend. Closure looks good in a nice dress, she joked. I went, not to gloat, just to prove to myself that the building no longer owned my pulse. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers again, laughter rising like champagne bubbles. People greeted me warmly, different now, respectful in a way they hadn't been when I was just the surgeon's wife. Halfway through the evening, the MC took the stage. Before we end tonight, we'd like to recognize a volunteer who reminded us that grace and resilience matter just as much as medicine. My name. Applause. I froze, surprised, then walked up, heels clicking against the marble floor. The lights felt softer than last year's. They handed me a small plaque. For compassion and quiet strength. Quiet strength. The words rippled through me like light on water. When I stepped down from the stage, I noticed Adrian standing near the exit. He didn't try to approach. He just nodded once, an unspoken apology or maybe admiration. Either way, it didn't matter, because for the first time, the sound of my name over the speakers didn't echo his shadow. It was mine alone. After the gala, I drove to the coast. The sea had always been my mother's cure for everything. Loss, grief, love that didn't fit anymore. Salt heals, she used to say. I parked near the cliffs, shoes in hand, walking until the wind tangled my hair. The tide was rising, silver under the moonlight. I stood there, listening to the rhythm that had nothing to do with monitors or hospital machines. For a long moment, I thought about forgiveness, how everyone talks about it like it's medicine. But sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiving. Sometimes it just looks like walking away without bitterness. I took a deep breath and whispered, "You were wrong, Adrian. I was never fragile." The wind carried the words into the dark, and I felt something loosen inside me. Months passed. Life settled into quieter rhythms: morning coffee, volunteering, weekends by the sea. I started studying again, taking night classes and counseling. I wanted to help people find the kind of steadiness I'd had to teach myself. One afternoon, while guiding a new volunteer through the ward, I caught a glimpse of an old photo on the bulletin board, taken years ago at a surgical team celebration. Adrian and I stood side by side, smiling, unaware of everything that would come after. I didn't feel anger, just distance, like watching a movie I'd already seen. "Is that you?" the volunteer asked. "It was," I said with a small smile. "A different chapter," she nodded, eyes bright. "You look happy." "I was learning," I replied. "Sometimes happiness looks like that." The following spring, the hospital invited me to speak at a community wellness event. They wanted someone to talk about resilience after loss. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my thing. But something in me said yes. When I stepped on stage, the lights weren't harsh this time. The microphone buzzed softly. I looked out at the audience, nurses, doctors, patients, families, and began. Sometimes life doesn't shatter all at once. Sometimes it cracks quietly, until one day you realize you've been breathing through broken glass. A hush spread through the room. "But the beautiful thing about breaking," I continued, "is that it lets the light in differently. You don't shine the same way again. You shine truer." Afterward, people came up to thank me. Lila hugged me tight. "You turned pain into purpose," she whispered. Maybe I had. Or maybe I'd just stopped hiding from the noise of my own heart. That evening, I went back to the sea. Same cliffs, same salt in the air. Only now, it felt like a beginning. I stood there, eyes closed, the wind pressing gently against my face. My phone buzzed. A new email from an overseas foundation offering a position in emotional care outreach. Switzerland. The same city Adrian had moved to. I stared at the screen, then laughed softly. The universe had a strange sense of humor. I typed one line in reply. "Thank you for the offer. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Then I turned off the phone and watched the horizon dissolve into gold. Summer came softly that year, like forgiveness wearing sunlight. The hospital garden, once a place I avoided, had become my favorite corner. I'd often sit beneath the magnolia tree with a notebook in hand, writing thoughts that no longer needed to hide behind metaphors. Sometimes, patients joined me, children with casts, old men with stories longer than mine. We'd talk about small things, how the sky looked different after rain, or how the scent of jasmine lingered even in hospital air. One day, as I was packing up my notes, the nurse supervisor approached. "You've got a visitor," she said gently. I turned, half expecting another patient or volunteer. Instead, it was Isabel, Adrian's younger sister. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. She looked nervous, clutching a paper bag. "I didn't know if I should come," she said softly. I smiled faintly. "You're always welcome." She sat beside me, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for months. "He asked me to bring this," she said, handing me the bag. Inside was a small journal, Adrian's handwriting on the first page. "For Elara. You don't owe me forgiveness, but I owe you the truth." I hesitated before opening it. Isabel watched me, her eyes kind. "He left for Zurich last week," she said. "He's trying to start over. And he wanted you to know that he's sorry, not for losing you, but for never deserving you." I closed the book gently, the wind tugging at its pages. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded, tears glinting in her lashes. "You look happy, Elara, different." "I am," I said. Finally. That night I read his journal. It wasn't long, just a handful of pages filled with things he'd never said aloud. Regret, guilt, small memories of us before the distance grew. There was no grand confession, no plea for another chance, just quiet acknowledgement. "You once told me love isn't about needing someone. It's about choosing them every day." I stopped choosing. "You didn't." When I finished, I closed it and placed it on the shelf, not as a wound, but as proof that closure sometimes arrives in silence. Life moved forward with an ease I hadn't thought possible. I finished my counseling, certification, and began working part-time at a small coastal wellness center. The clients were mostly people recovering from loss, different kinds of loss, but all sharing the same hollow ache. I listened to them, truly listened, the way no one had done for me when I'd first stood behind that hospital curtain months ago. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes both in the same breath, and every time I'd remind them, you can't rebuild who you were before the pain. You can only grow into who you're meant to be after it. They'd look at me with that flicker of hope I used to think was gone forever. One autumn afternoon, as the sun dipped low over the sea, I sat outside the center, watching gulls scatter across the sky. My phone buzzed, an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but something in me said yes. "Hello?" A pause. Then a man's voice, warm but unfamiliar. "Is this Elara?" "My name's Dr. Rowan Vale. I'm with the Zurich Institute." "I believe you know Dr. Adrian Keene?" My chest tightened slightly. "Yes, is he—" "He's fine," Rowan assured quickly. He asked me to reach out. "We're organizing a global mental health initiative, and your name came up. He said you'd be perfect for it." I blinked, stunned. "He recommended me?" "Yes, said you're the strongest person he's ever known." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The irony didn't hurt. It just felt full circle. "I appreciate it," I said finally. "But I'm happy where I am." "I understand," Rowan replied. "Still, if you ever change your mind, we'd be honored to have you." After we hung up, I sat quietly, letting the sea breeze brush through my hair. I didn't feel haunted by his name anymore. Just grateful for the lessons, for the leaving, for the becoming. The next morning, I walked down to the shore barefoot, as I often did after sunrise. The waves curled softly around my ankles. I closed my eyes, breathing in salt and light. I thought about that night long ago, the phone call, the storm, the way the world had cracked open under the weight of a single sentence. "Your husband's been in an accident." It felt like someone else's story now, someone I used to know, because this version of me, the one standing here now, wasn't waiting for rescue anymore. She was her own calm after the storm. Later that week, I met Lila for coffee at our favorite seaside cafe. She was still working at the hospital, still full of warmth and wit. "You're glowing," she said, stirring her latte. "Who's the secret?" I laughed. "Peace. She's a demanding partner, but worth it." Lila grinned. "You know, sometimes I think about that night. How everything could have gone differently if you hadn't listened to me, if you'd walked straight in and caught them together." I nodded slowly. I used to think about that too, but maybe I needed to see it the way I did, to learn the truth quietly, not violently. That moment broke me gently enough to rebuild. "Do you ever miss him?" she asked softly. I thought about it for a moment. "No, I miss who I thought he was." "But the illusion was heavier than the love." Lila smiled, eyes glistening. "You should write that down." I did. That night, in my new journal, months blurred into another year. The center grew. More clients, more stories, more chances to help. We started a support program for nurses and doctors facing burnout, and soon I was giving workshops at hospitals across the region. One day, I stood in front of a group of young medical interns. Sharing my talk titled Healing After the Fallout, I began with a question. How many of you have ever felt invisible while helping others shine? Hands rose hesitantly. I smiled. "I used to live like that," I said. Until I learned that being selfless shouldn't mean losing yourself. Their faces softened. Some nodded. Others took notes. I ended the talk with a line that had carried me through every sleepless night. Sometimes the heart breaks, so it can let itself out. Applause filled the room. I bowed my head slightly, humbled. After the session, one intern approached me, a young woman named Taryn. She said, "I heard your story once. Someone shared it online. A woman who discovered the truth behind a hospital curtain. Was that you?" I smiled gently. "It might have been. Why?" "Because it helped me leave someone who made me feel small," she said. "So thank you." I placed a hand over hers. Then it was worth it. That night back at the cottage, I found myself standing by the sea again. The horizon stretched endless and open. The nurse from that first night, Marion, still visited sometimes. She'd bring muffins, stories, and laughter that reached the waves. During one of her visits, she said something that stayed with me. "You know, Elara, the day you came running into that hospital, I thought you were breaking. But you were really beginning," I smiled. "Maybe breaking and beginning are the same thing." She nodded. "You've turned pain into poetry." As winter settled in, I lit candles by the window and reread pieces of my own story, now not as a wound, but as proof of evolution. I no longer flinched at memories of sirens or the sterile smell of antiseptic. The sound of monitors and documentaries didn't quicken my heart. Some nights, I even dreamed of the hospital. But peaceful now, full of white light, where no one hid behind curtains anymore. One evening, a letter arrived, postmarked Zurich. I recognized the handwriting instantly. I opened it carefully. "Elara, this isn't an apology, because I think you've already forgiven me in your own way, by forgetting to hate me. I just wanted to tell you that the program we built here is helping people who remind me of us, of who we were before the silence. I hope the world keeps giving you calm seas." Adrian, I folded the letter and placed it beside his old journal. Not as something to hold on to, but as something I could finally let rest. The final chapter of that year came quietly. I hosted a small mindfulness retreat by the coast. 10 women, each carrying their own story of loss and rediscovery. On the last day, we stood barefoot in the sand, forming a loose circle as the tide brushed our feet. I asked them to close their eyes and whisper one thing they were ready to release. When it was my turn, I said softly, "Fear." The sea carried it away. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I whispered the same words that had once marked the end of my storm. "Thank you for teaching me how to love myself enough to let go." And this time, I didn't cry. I smiled, because the ending wasn't really an ending at all. It was just peace, arriving on time. If you felt Elara's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cinematic stories of heartbreak, healing, and powerful revenge. Sometimes walking away isn't losing. It's how you win quietly.